Facebook and YouTube Live tonight. And I'm just excited to have you with us tonight. I've got a guest tonight, and we'll be talking about her in just a few minutes. But I just wanted to let you know that if you're just kind of stumbled across this live stream, let me know you're out there. Just kind of put in who you are, where you're from. It's great to have educators from around the country joining us tonight. And if you're joining us for the first time, really the goal of this live stream, the goal of what KeithRN really is about is providing nurse educators with practical and practice-based strategies to develop the clinical judgment that students need to basically be better prepared for practice as well as the NCLEX. And I have been doing this for about the last 3 months. And if you go to my Facebook page, KeithRN, Think Like a Nurse, I have got videos, 30 to 45 minute archived on numerous topics, on case studies, some great content that we've been discussing, really just to strengthen nursing education for the last 3 months. And so got some great information there. And I'm also the CEO of KeithRN. And, you know, my passion that drives all that I do with the innovative case studies, resources that I've developed is to really bridge the academic practice gap that has been in existence way too long in nursing education. It's been, would you believe that it's been almost 50 years? The first article that identified the disconnect between how nursing is taught and how it's practiced. And we need to bring that gap down. And I'm really excited to have each of you with me tonight to be part of that needed change and what that looks like today. So thank you again. And you know, as I was looking at the calendar today, some of you who've been following me for a little bit know that about a year ago, actually it was a year ago today, I was a patient at a large metropolitan hospital. And how many of you know that nurses don't make good patients? But I was diagnosed with prostate cancer last summer and had a radical prostatectomy just a year ago today. And you know, as you think about cancer, I'm really thankful that it was removed. The cancer is gone. I've had negative PSAs for the last 3 visits. And so things are looking really good for me. And so I really want to just give a shout out and thank you for literally the hundreds of emails I received a year ago when I just gently shared my journey. And I got so much encouragement and support. And I just really want to thank you all for your care and your prayers. And I just want you to know that I'm glad to put that in the rearview mirror and that I'm doing really, really well. And in fact, what was kind of an ironic kind of a story in this story is that, you know, in the OR, when I was getting prepared for surgery, ready to go under the knife, the nurse that I had in the pre-op looked really familiar to me. And she said, "You look familiar to me as well." And you know who she was? She was a former student 7 years ago that I taught at a local community college. And, you know, when we look at nursing education and the need to transform, you know, let's be real. We may be the recipients of the care of our students at some point. I was. And so, you know, let's strengthen and transform all that we do. But, you know, I just wanted to kind of be philosophical for just a moment, because it's important that we, when things happen to us, you know, whether it be the COVID-19 crisis, struggles with health, whether they be cancer or any other chronic problem, we have a way of just saying, you know what, I believe that it's a way that sometimes God wants to get our attention. And, you know, we don't want to waste these opportunities. And, you know, Pastor John Piper has a powerful resource called Don't Waste Your Cancer. And he identifies that the redemptive side of some of these pits that we experience. And, you know, for me, it really caused me to really step back and say, what's most important in my life? If I were not to survive this, what really matters? Now, KeithRN is important, and I love what I do to serve the needs of educators. And sometimes it can kind of creep up on the priority list. But you know what? What I've learned in my journey, it's all about relationships. It's about our relationship with our faith, with family, with friends, and ultimately other educators in this community. And I just really have made it a priority to make that first thing the first thing in my life. And I just sometimes, we can lose sight of that in the tyranny of the urgent, where we get all the urgent things as nurse educators, and I've got my platter full with KeithRN. We lose sight of what's most important. And I just really want to encourage you all as educators, spinning platters, COVID crisis, drama everywhere you turn sometimes in nursing education. What's most important in your life? And are you making time for it? Because, the tyranny of the urgent is a powerful article written many years ago. Google it, tyranny of the urgent, and you will be blessed because it really provides practical strategies to make first things the first things in your life. And, one verse that really spoke to my heart in this journey was Psalms 90, verse 12. It says, help me to remember that my days are numbered, and help me to interpret my life correctly. Your life is a story. There's a purpose. And you know what? Remember, we're not going to live forever on this earth. So really, let's make it a priority to put first things first and what that looks like. And so I think as we look at even COVID-19 through a redemptive lens, many of us as educators, we hate it. We hate COVID. We hate the drama. We hate the virtual realities. And there's some good things not to like. But what I see as an educator, and I see it kind of through a redemptive lens, COVID has a redemptive purpose, or I'm not saying it's good, but I'm saying that in nursing education, it really can be used to help us basically bring about needed change. Because what I've learned in nursing education, we don't like to change. And what COVID is forcing us to do? Change, do things differently, innovate. It can be a catalyst for transformational change. And that's why I'm really excited to have a guest with us tonight. And her name is Patti Reuther. And she is experienced in a wide variety of settings. She's immersed with her clinical experience in the NICU and maternal child, coronary intensive care, as well as school nursing. She started out as a clinical instructor back in 2008 at Binghamton University and is now the director of innovative simulation and practice at the Decker School of Nursing at Binghamton University since 2012. So she's been rocking it in simulation. And, when we our paths crossed, I recognized that Patti had something to offer and to really strengthen the virtual simulation, the real world simulation, the adjustments that we're having to make in nursing education with simulation because of our replacement of clinical. And so we're going to have a really powerful and practical conversation. We're going to keep it real. And I'm just excited to bring Patti into the conversation. And thank you so much, Patti, for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on your year anniversary.
Yes, it's good to have that behind me, as well as the PhD. What's kind of the dark side is that this was right in the middle of my PhD program. And you know what? I didn't take the term off. I got my blackboards done ahead of time, and I just did the recovery and kind of just kept the platter spinning, which wasn't, looking back, I should have paused. Yeah. But no, it's glad No. So anyways, great to have you here, Patti. I just, every educator, we all have our stories, how we went into nursing. I have mine. Everyone in this audience has their journey. And just to kind of put the big picture context, I just love to know, what was your journey? What got you involved in nursing and then going into nursing education and making that leap?
So, well, actually, I didn't start off in nursing. I started off in computer science. I have a math and computer science that I started with I worked at Kodak in Rochester for a bunch of years. So I just hated it. I hated every minute of it. It was, in a cubicle and not talking to people and programming all day. And I just didn't like it. So I went to figure out, well, what on earth should I do now that I've started this off in one direction. And I did that silly book, back that they used to have called What Color's Your Rainbow? And when you check off all those boxes, it said I should be a teacher or I should be a nurse. And I thought, well, I'm going to kill small children if I'm teaching. So nobody wants me to do that. So let me just, I think I'll try nursing.
Okay.
And I did, and I went back to school and I got a bachelor's in nursing and practiced for a whole bunch of years. And then my kids were growing up and I was trying to figure out, well, how am I ever going to get off of evening shift to see them now that they're getting into school age years? And so I started looking at education. While I was practicing, I was always the person. I was teaching maternal child care to the parents, in the evenings, and I taught CPR. So I kind of drove I liked that side of it too. So I went back for nursing education, and here I am.
Awesome. And you're teaching at Binghamton University.
Binghamton.
Yeah, for some reason I can't even pronounce it. It's not that hard, but it's 3 syllables. So
I know.
But tell us about your program, kind of the unique distinctives maybe, and just kind of, as a simulation, just kind of putting that together.
So we have a good sized program. We have traditional undergraduate that starts in their junior year. We have an accelerated track entry to nursing program. We have master's and DNP nurse practitioner programs and PhD program as well. So we've got about 320 undergrads overall, and a couple hundred, in various stages of the different programs that we have for the nurse practitioner and the PhD programs.
Okay. And when we look at simulation, Patti, that was your first role as a nurse educator, correct? You got your master's in nursing education, and that was your first role with simulation. So
not really. I was faculty, but I was doing simulation and faculty as well, right? So in my clinical roles, I chose to do simulation with my students. It was just developing. Simulation was just starting at Binghamton in 2007, 2006 when I was getting my master's. So I did some extra clinical time helping with the simulation, and then while I was teaching, I was doing simulation as well. And then 2012, the lab coordinator was retiring, and I thought, I really want her job because I want to do something different with this program. So then I started with simulation full time.
Awesome. And you must have seen the value of simulation as a clinic. Now, you were in practice, and you're as a clinical adjunct. You're kind of bridging both worlds, and then it's kind of like simulation. What did you kind of see as the value of simulation, and kind of in that infancy stage? What was it that attracted you to it, and what was it that some of the best practices that you kind of developed or that you learned in your journey? Because it's a process to strengthen simulation and really milk it like a good clinical for all it's worth.
Right. And I think that is the benefit of simulation, right? It is that concentrated nugget that you get to have everybody experience. And so the way I looked at it was, because I had seen it from every course in my curriculum, but it wasn't an organized program yet. It was, and so each course presented their simulation differently and gave different prep and different expectations. And it just didn't, it was a great start. It's how everybody starts, but it really needed somebody to have an overarching progression, a plan for the curriculum throughout. And so when I took it over, that's kind of what I developed. I changed the way we presented it so that everybody got the same thing, no matter what course. They knew what to expect. And then really dove into, the Society for Simulation Healthcare and Anaxel and figuring out what our best practices. But I really like simulation because I used to tell when I did my maternal child clinicals, I used to say, I can't trick that pregnant woman and on the one day you're in labor and delivery and make sure that you're gonna see a birth. I just can't do it. So, but simulation, I can make sure everybody takes care of a sick baby or a healthy baby, and they can go in and make all kinds of mistakes. And that's what I think is the value of it, is they can go in and fumble around and come back out and rethink it through and figure out how to do it better so that they're taking way better care of their patients out in the real world.
Right. And so when we look at traditional simulation, Patti, there was a pre-COVID time, and we need to remember that as educators, this too will pass. We don't know when it's going to pass, but we're going to get back to normal. And there'll be a new normal, but we're going to go back to simulation the way it's traditionally been used. Students will be on campus. We're going to have those opportunities. I would just like to know, when we look at traditional simulation, then we're going to go on to virtual and some of the hybrid things that you've done in the last 10 months. But when you look at the traditional model of simulation, what can we in nursing education do to strengthen and really kind of, when you talk about that framework or some of the ways, when do we start simulation? Fundamentals, wait until second year? Do we do it as a testing? Do we do it more as a formative learning a tool? I mean, just some of these big, broad strokes so that we as educators are utilizing best practices when we really, when that time comes when we are all on campus. And some of us are doing some hybrids already. So it's kind of like, but I would just love to know some of these, give us some 3 bullet points or whatever you've got to really help us as educators in the skills lab with simulation to really strengthen that and to really maximize the learning. Some of those, just flesh that out just a little bit more for our audience.
So the things that I think are most important, or that I find most important, is having faculty that believe in simulation and have an interest. You can't have, if your clinical group happens to be assigned to simulation that day, you shouldn't have that clinical instructor necessarily come. Consistency, having somebody who, so that every clinical group is going to get the exact same situation, and there's, they know what to expect. I do, with the undergraduate program, we mostly do formative or experiential simulations. We do some summative. I don't do high stakes simulations. I don't think that it's realistic enough, and there's not really the research there to justify high stakes for undergraduates at this point. They've been doing OSCEs for graduate programs for a long time, or advanced practice degrees, and those are better vetted, I think. But for the undergraduate, I'm not a big fan. I am a believer in deliberate practice to mastery, though. And so, you can go in and practice something and practice it again. Everybody can be a master in anything. It takes people different amounts of time. So that's what I think. So good faculty who are vested in it, everybody needs a briefing. You need to have a good, solid briefing that levels the playing field. Everybody knows what to expect. Simulation shouldn't be a surprise. And, they always give the phrase, what happens in simulation stays in simulation. And I only believe that in the, frankly, in the matter of don't, go back home to your roommate and go, you wouldn't believe what Keith did today in simulation. Holy crap, you don't do that. But honestly, if they go back to Keith in their roommate and say, hey, Keith, tomorrow you're going to go to simulation and you're going to have a CPR and he's going to do this, that, and the other thing. Well, that student is now replaying and reinforcing that learning in their brain by telling you, and you're all panicked about tomorrow. So you're listening and thinking it through. And frankly, nobody's done any different from the first group I have to the last group I have doing that same simulation. They all do the exact same thing, but they're learning while they're doing it. And so I'm like, go talk about it, have at it, teach each other. I personally think that's a strength to it.
Yeah, no, that's good. Is there a magic number of like how many participants and how many observers, when you look at just kind of the perfect mix of for a single simulation session, is there, some research to validate kind of best practices? There's
not enough research, that's for sure. We were just, I've been looking at that recently, and of course, looking at it more now because of the, because of the number of people that I've got to get through my simulation center because they don't have any clinical. And so we generally always did groups of 4 and 5, really liked groups of 4. You can put 2 nurses in, so they always have a partner. You have a family member or another role that somebody else is playing in the group. And then I generally have an observer, and I like the observer role. I give them a checklist. They get the nitty gritty of what I think should happen, and they're marking it off. And at the end of it, they're saying 3 things this group did great, 3 things if they could go through again, what would you do differently? And I let that person or a couple of people, they start the debriefing, because the nurses are going to come in and be like, oh my God, I can't believe I did this. They need to hear what they did well. And so we always started off there, and then we move into the meeting the objectives and how to, what did you see, what didn't you see, and where did you miss it? But yeah, that's I like that size group, but right now, frankly, I've got 2 nurses and a person, but I've got upstairs in our big lecture, our big room, spread out with social distancing, 10 people watching it, because I have to get them all through. So they're all doing the checklist and all participating in the debriefing, and it just makes for a bigger conversation. It's not my favorite. It gave students a lot of stress in the very beginning, being the ones on the mark. They haven't had a lot of clinical experience. They're very nervous, and now they're on the big screen. That's not my favorite, but now we're 12 weeks into it, and they're doing really well. They're doing really well. The stress, I think, has left the building, and they're doing a good job.
So do you find that the observer role, there's so many observers, but there's in comparison, the percentage of who are actually participating is smaller. Mm-hmm. Are you finding that the learning is compromised, or are you having such the observational experience, they're learning, they're sponging that, and then the debriefing afterwards, that it's kind of a group hug where we're all kind of in this together? Do you find that the learning of having more observers is still as rich versus the participants at ground zero?
I think if I had my preference, I would certainly like to have smaller groups. Yeah. But truly, the research supports that the observers get as much out of it as the participants. Sometimes I think more, because they're not under the gun, so they don't have that adrenaline rush going through their brains. And so it really, the debriefing is where you learn in simulation. And so it doesn't matter if you were the only person doing skills. I mean, you can do skills, task training using deliberate practice. So it's really the critical thinking that's going on, and that you don't have to be hands-on to do. That. Yeah, I mean, that's your case studies.
Right. Yeah, and kind of I'd just like to know, Patti, how did you connect with KeithRN? Where did that connection come from, and just kind of what has been your utilization of some of the resources, the unfolding cases that I've written and developed, or elsewhere? Just kind of curious, where did our paths cross, or that connection, and then using the tools, where did that kind of lead you?
I've been looking for a while, because I get a lot of emails from you, which is, you're doing a good job that way. So I've been looking, and I've been trying to decide, do I get it? Do I not? And then of course, COVID happened, and I said, well, I'm going to buy a subscription for me to. So
you went all in with the departmental membership, getting a.
Yep. Very shortly thereafter, after I downloaded it.
I'm a simulation person. I want the goods. I want as much as I can have, and I can kind of flush it out and sort through them.
Yeah, and it was really reasonable. I mean, and you didn't tell me to say that. It really is a reasonable cost for our department, way cheaper than some of the other stuff we're using, and it's really rich. So I looked at it and I said, well, what can we do with these? Well, we've got to make up clinical time. We've got to do some other things. I didn't end up using it a ton in the spring, because it happened kind of late for our semester, but was all ready to use them here in the fall. So for our clinical experiences, really limited. Like, our clinical group sizes are cut in half. Our clinical sites are limited, and actually we haven't been in clinical for 2 of our major ones for the last month. And so the clinical time is really limited. So we divided things into in-person clinical, simulation and learning, in the learning lab, and then what we're calling alternate clinical experiences, which are, case studies that are, you're doing synchronized debriefings on and talking through, or virtual sims like vSims or iHuman, or and they're doing all kinds of different learning projects for the elderly, and they're doing them virtually. So we've got a lot of different activities to help meet all of those clinical objectives. Just doing it in a variety of ways, but the lab got really busy really fast, and where, like you were saying, it takes a long time to get a clinical group through, or a whole cohort through the same simulation with those small groups. Now I've got 100 accelerated track students coming Tuesday through Friday in the morning, and then splitting up the 100 seniors in the afternoon. So they each get 3 hours, 1 day a week for that, and their, hopefully their clinical day. But anyway, so we're doing a lot of deliberate practice, and then simulation on top of it. And so the KeithRN have been terrific for us because I've had to mount so many more simulations than I normally do. And the students are missing clinical. So our senior cohort would normally have their OB clinical in the spring, and we were cut off exactly at the half mark. So half of the whole cohort didn't have OB, half of them hadn't even had med surge. I mean, it was, it's pretty significant. And I know we're not the only one in the same, we're all in the same boat, but so I wanted to start OB simulations to remind the seniors what they should have done and kind of reinforce getting them ready for the NCLEX, remind them all that stuff. But you can't throw them into the postpartum hemorrhage when they've never had a day on OB. So I looked at your, I think her name is Anna Jones. So she's a 17-year-old and, a healthy young mom, but of course going to be scared to death. So I had them do your case study as their prep at home. They came in with that prep, and we debriefed the case study as our briefing. So everybody could talk about, all of the important points and what are we looking at here? What do we need to focus on? And then I took that simulation and then right after that, I gave report on caring for her, and it was her discharge day. So the students were, the baby had at that point been circumcised, so they had to do that kind of teaching and assessment of making sure the baby voids and talking to mom about all that, but also all of her teaching, because I had the standardized patient who was voicing the mannequin be very anxious, like, I don't know how to bathe him, I don't know how to, things that had been reinforced, but they, just have her panic. So they went through all of this wonderful teaching, reinforcing all of those lectures they'd had in the spring. It worked out great. They just loved it.
And so really, so they took the student version. It's a writable PDF that they can basically. So do they fill it out then? So do they come to class? So they had to show that they did the work. There wasn't like a pass. You posted it ahead of time.
Yeah.
They did the case study of the structure, and then you just kind of took it and you just put a human face on it by saying, okay, you did the body of the case study with all the clinical reasoning questions, and they're all open-ended. There's no multiple choice. You either know the content or you don't, or can recognize what's relevant, and why is it significant, put your plan of care, etc. So you can lay the foundation, and then you just did the teaching and all of those things of discharge planning. At the very end of the case, they just made it real, and you had them act it out, and that was the simulation.
Yeah. Yeah, they get to practice all that good communication skills and empathy and just working with the young mother and understanding. So our debriefing focused a lot on what resources we have in the community for after discharge, and what would we assign a home health nurse to go visit? What about early intervention? What about all of those community resources that might be there? And then, just talking about, you get into the psychosocial aspect of it.
Teenage mom, she's 17, single, lives with her parents. So you get some really rich psychosocial considerations to really make it real.
Yeah.
Put it all together. So how long did that take? So how long did it take for the students, from what you got from feedback, to do the case study, the body of the case study ahead of time? And then how long did that discharge planning and that whole, at the end of this case study, how long did that take? And then what about the end of the case debriefing? So just to kind of give us like, how many hours did this really turn out to be this was the unfolding reasoning, which is the longest version, more advanced level that I've developed, but we'd just like to know kind of the general chunking of those, of the time.
Well, I kind of always plan. Well, when I'm looking at simulations, I'm of the belief of the 2 hours in clinical is worth 1 hour in simulation, because the learning is so much more focused and attentive, right? They really are vested in the whole time they're there is really quality learning. Yeah. And I give enough prep work that we're making up hours too, just by the learning they're doing with the whatever prep we're assigning as well. So I always kind of figure the prep should take them somewhere around 3 hours ish. If they're doing it well.
That's about right. From what I've heard from other faculty, the unfolding level takes about 3, sometimes 4 hours of individual student work. Did they do it independently or in small groups? Or did you give them that flexibility?
I don't ask that question.
But they just come and they haven't done.
If they haven't obviously copied and pasted from their neighbor, God bless them. But they know I'm going to ask them questions. I'm going to say, Keith, tell me about her background. So-and-so, tell me, give me her labs. So-and-so, what was her labor like? So-and-so, what's her social? I'm asking questions. They know I'm going to ask the questions. So if they again, if you're sitting doing a case study as a group project, you're making conversation. It is very rarely that somebody's going to hand you their work and they just copy and paste it. They generally sit and have a conversation. And isn't that richer learning? So I just don't ask the question.
Take that. What was
right. So we take about a half an hour to brief, go through the case and then give the report. And because of COVID, we're keeping all of our simulations to under 15 minutes. So we try to aim for 10, and usually they get about 12. But we're trying to, in our lab, in order to open, we are requiring medical grade masks and goggles. If you're on the simulation floor, you have to be wearing it. I don't care if you're sitting observing the simulation, because I don't want to have to remember when you're 6 feet or closer, right? So you just have to wear them. And so that's what they do. But I still am trying to keep it to under that time frame, so that if they're in a closed space, it's big enough to socially distance and have 3 people in. But do I need to add to that? So that's what I do. So about 15, less than 15 minutes in the simulation, and then they come back up. And best practices say this debriefing should take usually double or so time to really go through the phases of debriefing. And you can ascribe to a variety of different frameworks. We tend to use the gather, analyze, summarize one, because I just think it's easy. And so that's what we use. But there's the there's all kinds of them. The plus delta, I'm not going to remember the names of them right now, but anyway, so but that's what we use. And we have the same kind of framework, and we start off with what do they do well, letting the nurses get off their steam so they can get into it, talk to them about what they did well, what can we do different if we want, and hit the main points of the objectives for the simulation, talking about all of those things. And then we summarize it by, okay, so if you're taking this out in the world, what are we going to do? How do we expand it? And so overall, it was about an hour and a half in the simulation time frame.
And what was the student response? How did they like the cases and just this approach to simulation, where you're kind of structuring it a little differently, with having a case study as kind of the foundational prep, doing a little sim based on the case, and then the debriefing? Was the student experience, compared to a traditional simulation, how did that compare? What was the feedback?
They very much liked the different prep. We're very care plan based. I can't get them to think differently, my faculty. So they do lots of care plans, and they get sick of the care plans. So having this different framework for how they're thinking and how they're pulling out the information, I think they found very useful. And we've used it twice more this semester. And then I have other clinical faculty that are having their students, because they're not in clinical, coming in and using one of the sim rooms and just rotating their students through caring for a couple of your different cases. And so they're really enjoying. I just think that it helps them it's giving them a different perspective, and it's helping the instructors talk more about different things too, you know, because you always have a ton of adjuncts who aren't exactly sure what questions to ask, and I think it gives them a nice framework to move from.
Yeah, and I think it's important that, you know, if you're not familiar with the KeithRN cases, really they incorporate the essence of Tanner's model and framework of clinical judgment, of what are you noticing? Then what is your interpretation of this clinical data? What's its meaning? What is its significance? And then the third step is responding. What's the plan of care? How is the nurse, you know, what does that response look like as you interpret the data correctly, and then evaluative reflecting. And so Tanner's model, if you're not familiar with it, Google Thinking Like a Nurse, a research-based framework of clinical judgment, to really see the original article in 2006, but it really provides a really relevant practice-based framework of clinical reasoning. And I kind of add to it with a few of my questions from current practice on problem recognition and other aspects of priority setting, but they're all open-ended. It's the same framework throughout all of the case studies. So I just want you to know, if you're not familiar with the KeithRN cases, that's kind of the secret sauce, or kind of the structure. And Tanner's framework, ironically, is the same framework that the NCSBN model of the Next Gen NCLEX borrowed from for their 6 steps. And so Tanner's framework and the Next Gen model, very similar. So yeah, that's really cool, Patti. Last closing question is this. I want pearls. You know, I want your closing pearls of simulation. So as you look at just, you know, looking at the big picture, you're looking at some of the strategies of just strengthening simulation, whether it be virtual, the hybrids, though, you know, what would be some of what have you learned in your journey that you could share with educators who are tuning in that would encourage and strengthen their practice in simulation, whatever that might be?
Well, certainly, I think that using the standards of best practice and really, you know, owning those has really been very helpful. And I'm very type A, and I very much wanted somebody to tell me exactly how to do it. And the standards won't do that. They basically let you use what you need for your program, but give you a way to do it. And I have found that to be really, really useful. I think that you got to think outside the box. You can't, you know, you have to have plan A, but know that plan B, C, and D are probably going to be needed, certainly during COVID. So, you know, if a clinical is called off in the best of days as opposed to COVID, you got to have a backup plan. So what's your backup plan? And have a standard backup plan so that if you're doing a virtual or they're coming into the lab, you've got a structure so that students are getting a valuable experience and it's not left to chance. And I just can't stress enough that it shouldn't, you know, it should be a safe space, whether they're getting a summative exam or they're having experiential. It's a safe space because they know what to expect, and they all can succeed when they come, and they'll leave knowing more than they came in with.
And that means it's a safe place to make mistakes, and that there's learning that takes place, but that, you know what, we be civil and respectful.
Right.
We demonstrate that civility in simulation where it is a safe place. And so really is that collaborative spirit, a supportive spirit in the simulation. And I think faculty set that tone and holding students to that high bar. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why I think that you need to fight for committed faculty or to have simulation as part of a workload. You know, simulation is an expensive curriculum, and if you can manage to get it as part of a workload so that you have dedicated faculty and you're going to give the same information every time, you don't have a faculty member going, oh my God, going off kilter because they got distracted by a student doing a skill wrong. You know, they're staying with the objectives of the simulation and know that they can correct that later. That's really important.
No, thank you so much for sharing, Patti. And you know what? Patti's going to stick around for a few more minutes. She's East Coast, so she's getting ready for bedtime. I think she's got her jammas on in the lower half. She's not going to tell me, but I have a feeling. But the bottom line is she's going to stay with us for a few more minutes. And I'm just going to kind of, I'm going to go off for about, I'll give you 1 or 2 minutes to kind of prepare Patti. And I want you all who are attending, what are your questions for Patti? Strengthening simulation. So I want you to kind of just process those. But I just wanted to kind of share, just kind of in a closing extra here, just kind of, letting you know that on KeithRN.com, on my website, if you're not familiar with it, I've got a free website, and that's my email. I'm sorry, let me go to right here. KeithRN.com, I've got a free case study on COVID-19 that you could take and use it as either a clinical, use it in simulation as a great respiratory exemplar, or use it like Patti did in simulation. And that's a free download on KeithRN.com. Love you to check it out, about other case studies that you can purchase individually. But like Patti mentioned, really my best value is the all-inclusive membership. And I recognize that, I've got just about 25 topics on KeithRN you can purchase individually, but the best value, I've got 110 topics across the entire curriculum. Peds OB, mental health, advanced med surg, critical care, community health, fundamentals, basic med surg, inside the membership with different levels of complexity and at no additional cost, where you can access everything, not only the case studies, but I've got teaching webinars with contact hours to really strengthen our practice as educators and develop faculty, and other handouts to strengthen clinical teaching. So if you want to go all in, just check out the informational page. And I do have not only individual memberships, but also departmental memberships at a discount to get all faculty on board. And if there's an interest to consider that resource in your program, just email me at keith@keithrn.com. Or if you have questions of any kind, I'm always available to best serve your needs in nursing education. So I'm going to bring Patti in, and I just want to know what questions are out there tonight. I'm going to check my chat box, and I'm going to basically just kind of see what's out there. And I am going to, let me just pull some questions here and basically put this all together. Here's a question for you, Patti. I wonder, this is from Dagmara. I wonder, what are your thoughts of not being able to practice with simulation now during COVID-19? How will it affect student success, and what adjustments can be made? What are your thoughts?
I think that we should fight to get into your labs. There's ways to do that, and to petition with your administration to get back into the lab using safe practices, social distancing, medical grade masks and face shields or goggles are what we're requiring. And I think that and if you can't get back in your lab, what we've done is we've actually we had a couple of our students come in, and we recorded them going through simulations with their permission, of course, and then we're having students watch them from home via some Zoom or WebEx or whatever program you have, and we're doing synchronous simulations with them during that, and debriefing that way. And that's been really successful too. So, be creative with your iPhones and videotaping. If you don't have expensive equipment, it really doesn't take much. You just need a couple people doing a videotape. And so how will it affect him? I think that what's happening right now is devastating to all of our nursing students. However, what I have noticed, I think that they think they think it's devastating, right? But what I have found this semester, because I'm bringing them in the lab more, is they're getting through my simulations where they would fumble through and be hanging a secondary bag but fumbling through the whole simulation. They're getting through things so much faster. And I think their critical thinking skills are way, way better, way further along than they normally would be. So I think that what it's going to look like when they graduate, their orientations are going to need to be different. But I think that preparedness-wise, brain-wise, they're going to be ready, because that's what we do. So I worry about the hands-on. I know they worry about the hands-on, but honestly, it takes you 3 times to learn a skill, right? It just, that's muscle memory. The thinking about what to do in the middle of a crisis, takes longer, and that's what we're working on, because that's all we can work on.
Yeah, and I would kind of add to that, Patty. That's a great point. And just the point is that, thinking like a nurse and that reasoning process is also a critical cognitive thinking skill that also needs to be practiced. And so you can do that in simulation as well, and they can transfer that knowledge then into the real world settings. So we can be role modeling best practices. I think that's really, what I hear coming through loud and clear through your presentation is really embracing best practices. And that's our foundation. And that's going to be our savior to strengthen our student learning despite the storm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I got a question from Lisa, who has a really, more of a question, but I think you would resonate with this, Patty. I'm an OB clinical instructor. I explained to my students that we go to the sim lab because I can't request the hospital to have patients that have a postpartum hemorrhage, preeclampsia, or a preterm labor patient. So I think you get her. Would you like to just, anything you'd like to expound on that and just kind of say that you can really, what would you say to that?
And that's exactly right. And if that student had that patient, they'd be off in a corner or they would be told, go get me this. Now you do this. Now you do that. If they're in simulation, they have to come up with it themselves. And I'm a big fan of putting them in together. If it's experiential, let them talk to each other and work it out together. But you're exactly right. If they had these critical patients and we want them to be able to think through these high risk, low frequency stuff, we have to put them in simulation and let them practice that thinking. And that's why we go to simulation. Exactly.
Yeah, no, and ironically, I do have, case studies on some of those complications
that are
postpartum hemorrhage, preeclampsia, abruptio placentae, if I said that right, if that's the current vernacular. But yeah, some of those unfortunate challenges that can be life-threatening.
Sure.
And we don't want our patients to die.
That's right.
Awesome. I've got a question here from Nainita. She says, how do you manage clinical absentee sim makeup? That's a really good question. So what are your thoughts?
So I'm reading it a couple of different ways. So I'm trying to figure out, does she mean, do we do clinical absentees? So if they were supposed to go to clinical and they were absent, do we make up in the sim? That's one way for me to read that question. The other way is what do I do if they've missed a simulation day?
Why don't you cover both? Why don't you just give your thoughts on both of those? Because I think they both are relevant. So go ahead and give us your two cents.
So the easy one is, what do I do for a sim makeup? In not COVID land, I assign them to a different clinical group. I let them choose a day that works for them, that we're doing the same sim, and they make it up. So that's my easy answer to that. What I do during COVID time is, because of course I've got students quarantined or in isolation, or they, whatever reason. So we've been having them, and I will do this forevermore, join via Zoom as an observer. So now they haven't missed their clinical day, unless they're really sick. I mean, if they're sick, then of course, but they'll join by Zoom on a different day. And make it up that way. So I do that a lot. And then, when I have them come in, I'm having skills and simulation usually. So for the skills, they're going to have to come to open hours and practice that skill independently. So if they've missed a clinical day, do I have them come into sim for a makeup? And in general, I have not. I don't think it's necessarily the same experience. However, given COVID, I'm going to have to figure it out differently, right? Because that's what we've been doing, is I'm doing more in the learning lab and in the simulation space because we're not in clinical. So it has expanded our ability to figure out what's a clinical makeup look like, and have them. And now we've got people coming in and doing these, taking one of your case studies and running through that patient. They're having their students come every 30 minutes through the sim room and watching their students go through it. It's working out really well. So I think that I think that there's a home for it. I think you need enough faculty to do it, and the right faculty to do it, because the other aspect of that is, what do you do for a student that is not meeting clinical objectives? excuse me, and they like them to come to the lab for me to fix it. But usually what they're missing is the clinical judgment piece, not the skill piece.
Sure. And, she did clarify, so what do you do when they missed the clinical due to COVID-19 quarantine?
That's what I'm having them join via Zoom.
Got it. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you know what, Patti, that is our last for the night. And, this has been a really invigorating discussion. I loved your feedback and just all the innovative work you're doing in simulation. I know that, do you have any closing thoughts or anything you'd like to share that you just didn't get a chance to? Is there any
I saw somebody from SUNY Canton say hello earlier. And okay. So as a fellow SUNY person, I want to say a nice shout out back and hope to hear from you. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat about what we're doing. It's a lot of fun. It's been a wild ride, but what I'm actually looking forward to out of this, because you were saying it is going to change practice. My closing thought is that I think that it is absolutely going to change the way we think about how we deliver education in every kind of aspect, but certainly in healthcare. And hopefully we're going to find a lot of different ways to do this, and we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. And yeah, they can have my address.
Yeah. Can I send your, can I basically, what I did basically, there it is. I already pre-formatted that just in case I had that request. And so, for any of you who are watching, I think, Patti, would you respond to it? You'll respond to emails like I do, won't you?
Absolutely. It's great to collaborate. Absolutely. Everybody's always got such great ideas. So I just love it.
So, if you have a question that didn't get addressed, or you just want to just pick Patti's brain, she has a heart to serve, just like myself. And we're all in the same boat. We're going to support each other. We're in the lifeboat together. We're not going to go down with the Titanic. We're going to stay afloat. We're going to survive, and we're going to thrive. And I think we're even going to transform how nursing education is taught and strengthen how we teach, and even bring about those transformational changes that Dr. Benner advocated 10 years ago, bringing clinical and class together and emphasizing clinical reasoning. What Patti's doing and some of these strategies that I've developed can really bring about that transformation. So let's do it together. We're stronger together. And till next week, blessings to you. And thank you again, Patti, for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure.
Have a good night.
Blessings. Take care. Have a good night, guys.